Hello and welcome to Joy in Our Town. I'm your host, Vanessa Rose. Thank you so much for tuning in and joining us for another great edition today. Today we are going to be speaking about education, and we are joined by Miss Brandy Wells, and she is the Director of Public Affairs and Education at TGen, a wonderful nonprofit organization here in the Valley, also known as the Translational Genomics Research Institute. Thank you so much for being here, Brandy.
Thank you for having me, Vanessa. I'm really glad to be here today.
Yeah, it's wonderful to have you and to learn about some things that are going on at TGen that's doing great things for our state and as well for our nation, really, because it's all things that are applied all over the place. And also to learn a few educational topics. But before we get started, if you wouldn't mind just telling us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Absolutely. So I am the Director of Public Affairs and Education at TGen. So that includes managing TGen's relationship to the community as well as overseeing all of our science education initiatives. My background is in the sciences. I have a bachelor's degree in biology and a master's degree in biotechnology. I moved to Arizona in 2009, and this is a beautiful place to call home. So I'm so glad to be here. I also volunteer in the community at a local hospice, and I have a lot of fun on the weekends with my pug.
A little puppy dog. Dogs are always fun, right? They're a great source of companionship. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being here and for taking time away from TGen. And would you just mind sharing what exactly does TGen do? What do they do? Because that's something that a lot of people in the Valley have probably heard of them before.
Right.
They have a very big presence here in the Valley, but a lot of people probably don't know exactly what they do.
Right. So TGen is a nonprofit private biomedical research institute.
Okay.
And the goal of TGen is to use the information that we learned from the Human Genome Project, which is essentially the human genome is the recipe for making a human being. Once we completed that project, we wanted to translate what we learned in the research laboratory from the Human Genome Project into patient treatments as quickly as possible. So TGen is dedicated to finding new diagnostics and treatments for patients that can be individually tailored to their molecular makeup.
Wonderful. Wow. Lots of, for all the non-scientists out there, it's like, wow, that's why you typically go by TGen, right? And it's
Correct.
like, that sounds great.
Right. Absolutely.
You're doing good things. Wonderful. Well, thank you again, Brandy. And for all of you at home, today we are speaking about education, and our first topic is STEM education. This is something that has actually been going around a lot, not only in Arizona, but across the nation, is STEM education and an emphasis on STEM education. A lot of people have probably, again, heard just STEM. What does STEM stand for?
STEM is something we hear a lot about in the community. STEM education, when we're referring to that, it's typically referring to science, technology, engineering, and math. And it's usually in context of students, either at the high school level, the K-12 level, but also at the college level. And the reason we're hearing so much about STEM is that not only are those fields full of skills that students can use throughout their academic curriculum, but they're also very relevant to the professional workforce. So things like objective data analysis, drawing data-driven conclusions, critical thinking, all of those skills are taught and learned and reiterated over and again in science, technology, engineering, and math classes. There's also the issue that there are a huge number of STEM jobs every day, that the rate of STEM jobs is growing higher than other professions. And so if we don't have enough graduates with STEM backgrounds to fill those jobs, there's a missed opportunity.
Is it something that's being encouraged? Because I know that that's one thing with young people in school and children is you hear science or technology or engineering or math, and a lot of times it scares a lot of young people. And so are there programs that are being put together that are actually encouraging young people and saying, hey, you know, you can do this. Don't be afraid of math. Don't be afraid of science, because it's something that's very daunting, and I don't know the exact statistics, but especially for women, a lot of times women don't go into those fields because they're afraid and they're, well, I can't do this, or I'm not capable of doing this, whenever they have the same capability of doing it as a young man does. So what is being done to help encourage STEM education here?
That's a great question. I think STEM can be a very daunting field for many students and for many young people and even adults who are considering it as a career option. So there are statewide initiatives, there are local initiatives, even schools, public, charter, and private, have individual initiatives inside their school walls to help emphasize STEM and not only teach STEM, but make it an enjoyable learning experience. One area of STEM that people are currently discussing is hands-on experiences that make STEM education fun and make the student feel ownership over their education and really dive into what makes STEM education useful in our society. So I can tell you that at a place like TGen, we see it as a responsibility to help educate and train the next generation of researchers and physicians, especially females, especially underserved populations as well. So we have a partnership with the Helios Education Foundation and created a 25-year summer internship program called Helios Scholars at TGen. It's an excellent program, but the goal of it is to bring Arizona students into TGen laboratories for hands-on biomedical research experience. The students are not given intern projects or asked to clean glassware or make photocopies. We bring them into the science that our scientists would be doing anyway, break off a student-sized chunk for a summer internship, and expect them to run with it. We have very high expectations for our students, and what it brings to the table is students are able to essentially get their hands dirty in the world of STEM. They learn the technology, they learn the technique, they have an opportunity to actually apply the critical thinking and analysis skills that they've been taught in school. And it is in experiences like internships and shadowing opportunities that you could really hone those skills and change the minds of students about how valuable or fun STEM can be.
Well, it can, because whenever you're in something like in 4th and 5th grade, I mean, you start doing dissecting things, and it's exciting and it's something you talk about, but then as you get a little bit later on in school, it gets a little more complicated, and it sometimes is whenever kids get turned off to it, and it's, oh, well, I don't want to put in the hours or the time or the effort, but it's actually really, it really pays off, and you have a wonderful opportunity whenever you get later on. What is the age group that is involved in, and when does it usually become something that they want to do? When are they the most malleable and the most interested in learning about it?
Well, I would say that students are malleable and possibly interested throughout the entire educational continuum. But at a place like TGen, where we're putting them on actual research projects, we start at the high school level.
Okay.
So we have high school level, undergraduate, graduate, and even a few medical students join us every summer for these summer internships. I would say the majority are undergrads. It's a pretty competitive program, I think, because students are actually given the opportunity to impact lives. They're working on authentic research projects and able to actually see the results of that work many times.
As a woman who finished in science, I finished in a social science, but what kind of encouraged you? When did it become something that was of interest? And did you have other females that you went to school with that it was something that interested you and that you moved forward in for a reason, or what caught your attention?
STEM education has been an interest area for me since I was a young girl. I've always had a passion for understanding how our world works and hopefully being able to use that information to change people's lives. But where I really honed my STEM education interest was when I was a teacher. I taught 7th, 8th, and 9th grade life science and biology here in Arizona and also in Washington, D.C. public schools while I was in graduate school. And being the science teacher, I had the opportunity to educate students in the skills that we've just been talking about. And I saw many of the things you mentioned, some students being discouraged, women being discouraged, just not choosing this field as something that was empowering to them. And I did my best as an educator to overcome those barriers, but I noticed that students who allowed STEM education, science, technology, engineering, and math, to be a focus of theirs ended up doing well in all of their other academic coursework. So I firmly believe that the skills you learn in a STEM curriculum can translate into success across all academic disciplines. And that's really what the beauty of STEM education is that it elevates the entire student, the whole student, to be successful and competitive.
No, absolutely. And as a matter of fact, being a STEM graduate, I know that it's been found that STEM graduates from college actually have twice as many job opportunities. And being here in Arizona, I know that with a new governor and with all these things, they're trying to bring in more organizations and more companies that are doing this. So is that something that you have found is taught in schools and that's encouraged, that they're telling them, you know, if you go to school for something else, there's not as many people that are willing to go through these programs. And so if you're willing to take the time and the effort to put yourself through, you're going to have a much better job opportunity, because as we know, a lot of young people graduate college today with a lot of student debt and no job opportunity. So is that something that is being pushed in our schools as well, not just through nonprofits? Is that something that's being, I know that it's being harnessed here in our educational system.
So as teacher and director of public affairs and education, I do have the opportunity to sit on boards and advise many educational programs here in Arizona. And I will tell you that I see that emphasis everywhere. STEM education has become something that we are laser-like focused on at this point, which I think is excellent because of the skills it teaches.
No, it does. And one thing you mentioned is critical thinking. That's one thing that I think, in dealing with young people myself in different organizations, that maybe isn't taught as much in schools today. And whenever young people get into college, and I know whenever I went through and talking to people, it wasn't that ability to differentiate between an argument and say, hold on just a second, and to question things. It's that something that's taught in the sciences and in the maths, is that critical thinking skill. And how do you think that is, how do you think it's taught differently in that sector versus other sectors?
I think critical thinking becomes such a necessary part of even the most basic STEM curriculum that students have no choice but to constantly be evaluating and reevaluating. You do literally collect data in a STEM class, and then you're expected to use that data from experiments or from even a textbook or a workbook. You're expected to find the data to support your arguments. And because you are working with a very distilled version of data, those skills are constantly exercised and your critical thinking muscle grows, and it becomes easy to transfer that knowledge into your other disciplines.
Yeah, no, it does, and it's wonderful, and it's a skill that you can take with you through the rest of your life. Even if you decide to get a degree in that and don't move forward in that, it's something that truly can make a difference in young people's lives. What would you say to young people who were thinking about maybe going in that field? I don't know if you ever travel and go to schools, or if you ever speak to young people that are thinking about it. What would you say to them working in the field and finishing in this field?
I would say that one of the most important things you can do for yourself if you're interested in STEM education is to gather as many experiences, informal and formal, academically as you can. So if that is taking the top level science courses, if that is starting a science club at your school, if that is majoring in or joining a club at your university or community college, creating opportunities for yourself to have STEM experiences, and then compete for internship programs, compete for other experiential learning opportunities so that you can set yourself apart. And lastly, because of the way medicine and science, research, engineering, and mathematics are moving, we have technology to have huge data sets about many different problems and topics, and things are only becoming more complex with the more data we're able to collect about the world's problems. And most of that is analyzed using computers. So for any student interested in STEM education, I would recommend computer programming or understanding computer information systems. Also mathematics and statistics are very important as well.
They are, and that's something that a lot of people hear and get, oh my goodness, I know that math is always one thing that you hear math and it's like, oh no, not math, but it is something that once you take control of it and once you take the power over it, it really makes a difference. And just to finish on that note, you had mentioned doing internships, doing things from a young age. And that's going to make a big difference whenever they decide to go to college. And I know that there's a lot of organizations, private and public and nonprofit and even governmentally backed, that are really pushing this right now because they want to have the people, because of all the jobs that are opening in this. And they don't have enough people graduating with these degrees. Is if the young people really take the time to do that in middle and in high school, their opportunity for scholarships is probably going to open up greatly, and it's going to make them more competitive in that.
Absolutely.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Brandy, for joining us for this first segment of Joy in Our Town.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, great information, and I hope that this has been helpful to you. And please don't go anywhere, because we will be right back after this short break.
Here's your sandwich, miss.
Oh, thank you.
And your burger.
Awesome, thank you.
And your bowl of boiling water, sir.
Hello and welcome back to Joy in Our Town. I'm your host, Vanessa Rose. I'm so happy that you decided to stay with us. If you just happen to be joining us, today we are joined by Brandy Wells, and she is the Director of Public Affairs and Education at TGen, which is the Translational Genomics Research Institute, a nonprofit organization here that's doing great work in the Valley and that's teaching and working with young people, as we were just speaking about with STEM education and encouraging innovation and education among them. And now we are going to be moving, we're still speaking about education, into precision translational medicine. Oh my goodness.
Right.
It's one of those tongue twisters. Not really, but we're good. And so we are, what is precision and translational medicine?
So precision medicine is a model for medical care that seeks to look at each individual patient as a unique molecular individual. So before the completion of the Human Genome Project, traditional medicine was conducted in a way that was far less specific. It was essentially a model of what works best for the most patients. Okay. And that would be how we modeled the standards of care to treat every patient. But as anyone who's been affected by cancer or has had a loved one affected by cancer, for example, knows that what works for one patient with cancer may not work for another patient, even if they're diagnosed with the same cancer. And that's because there are other molecular factors at play. So since we've sequenced the human genome and we have the blueprint for what creates a human or what could drive disease in a human being, we can look a lot deeper at what is going on molecularly in an individual and seeing every patient as an individual. So ultimately, what precision medicine is and how it's different is looking for the unique disease driver for each individual patient and then finding the right treatment option for the right patient at the right time.
So there's probably a lot of different aspects taken into account. I mean, you're probably looking at genetics, you're probably looking at family history, you're looking at all of these things. So
Absolutely.
Is that something that once you find a treatment, once you find something, that's whenever you hear about, you hear things like, be part of a research study, be part of this. Are those things that play into this, being part of a research study, being part of a database, putting yourself out there to help other people?
Well, yes, being part of research studies is actually how we're bringing precision medicine to the forefront. Okay. So it's a slow process. We completed the Human Genome Project less than 20 years ago. So this is now, we're moving towards that model for medicine. As more information becomes available and as more people participate in this customized model of care, it will only improve. And the idea is to see every patient as one individual rather than somewhat of a one-size-fits-all approach for medical treatment.
Well, no person has the same DNA, right? So why would anybody have the same exact treatment or the same exact thing, especially for something like cancer or something that...
Absolutely.
That's something that's very interesting. Just for people watching that maybe aren't familiar, do you just have like a small little recap of whenever you say the Human Genome Project? I'm familiar with it, but a lot of people might not know what it is.
Right.
What was that?
So so the Human Genome Project was the goal to take a look at all of the DNA in humans. What is the actual code that makes up human life? As we know, everything that is alive has a genome, or DNA, genes, genetics, genome. All of these words are interrelated. That is essentially the recipe book or blueprint for how to create that organism. So the Human Genome Project was a worldwide effort to uncode what is a human being. And it took 10 years and about $3 billion to complete the project. Wow. But it was in the early 2000s where we completed the Human Genome Project, and now can take a deeper look at the code of each individual and see where there might be changes that drive that individual's disease. So we have this information not just to have it and say we uncoded the human genome, but for the betterment of people's lives, to find treatments for people based on their unique code.
Wow. And so that's something that is benefiting people all over the world.
Absolutely.
And it's helping people. And so TGen is probably one stem of that, but there's probably organizations all over the world that are doing what TGen is doing and taking that further and doing research studies and doing things for that.
Right, so that is essentially precision medicine. Another word for that is translational medicine. And the idea is to translate what we learn in the research laboratory from things like the genome into patient treatments at the bedside as quickly as possible.
And so do you have, maybe for people, they're hearing all these big words and it's like, oh my goodness, it's interesting, but I don't quite get it. Do you have an example of what this truly is and actually applied to someone that you've seen?
Right, I understand. There's no better way to illustrate this than examples. So there's actually a story of a young woman named Shelby. You may be familiar with it. She has been around town telling her story. But Shelby was a young girl who was completely cognitively normal. She was just as smart as anyone else. But as a young girl in middle school, she was not able to walk on her own. She was in a wheelchair. Shelby was declining in her level of function in terms of being able to eat on her own. She was losing the ability to breathe on her own. She was no longer able to talk. No one could figure out what was wrong with Shelby. She had seen doctor after doctor, physician after physician. She had gone through so many different tests. And as a young child, being in a wheelchair, not getting to enjoy your, your school life and growing up, it was a real struggle for her and for her family to watch, especially because she was on this diagnostic odyssey where no one could give the family answers. So it seemed relevant that she could join TGen's Center for Rare Childhood Disorders, where we sequenced Shelby's genome at TGen and found a change in a gene that was driving her unique disease. The disease didn't have a name. It's not something that they just couldn't find in the medical books. It was Shelby's disease. It's her unique change that was driving it. So the reason it was such a struggle to diagnose her was that it had not been seen before. So at the same time as we're able to look and say, okay, we see that change, that is why we're seeing these symptoms in Shelby, they were also able to say, well, you know what? I think we can figure out a few treatments that might work now that we know what's really causing the disease. So they started Shelby on a treatment plan, and within a few months, her family got rid of the wheelchair lift in her car. They are in their car. Shelby can talk. Shelby goes to restaurants. She goes shopping, and one of her favorite activities now is dancing. She says it's how she expresses herself. So things like that are what precision medicine can do to change lives. Shelby is now a happy high school student who I believe is doing hip hop and ballet.
And before, she wasn't even able to walk or communicate or do anything.
And she was declining in function. So, we were lucky that we were able to get Shelby into TGen Center for Rare Childhood Disorders before things got worse.
That being said, though, you have specific diseases. I mean, you have something like Lou Gehrig's disease, someone that had it the first time, and then it became more prevalent, and more people did start to get it, and they did start to notice more people had it. Is that something that, is there really diseases that are just specifically to one person, or eventually could that help another person that comes up with that, and then they get diagnosed with the same thing? Or is it really truly just their own genetic makeup? Or is it something that once it's discovered, it can help those people? Because what if someone didn't have the availability to an organization that actually could go in and look at their genome and what's creating this? Is that creating further data for one day in a year, if another little girl comes in or another little boy comes into a hospital and they say, hold on just a second, we recognize this, does that get put somewhere? Does that get applied on a giant scale where someone can actually say and they're actually educated? Does it get put into textbooks? How does that work?
Right, well, this type of research can help everyone. It has the power to help all of humanity, essentially. So while patient information is always protected, the results of these studies are published in scientific journals and medical journals so that we can share our understanding of human disease with as many people as possible. So the goal isn't to only help the individual. The goal is to help all by treating them as individuals. So there are cases where someone may have the same diagnosis, but their version on a molecular level of the disease is different. But there are also cases where it could be the same. The same genetic driver is driving that same diagnosis. Now, in those cases, we can say that the same treatment would likely work for those two patients. So it depends, but if we don't look molecularly, we won't know that's the case.
Yeah.
So that's the goal, is to take a deeper dive into what drives human health and disease.
Yeah, well, it's a trial and error, right? I mean, that's science. It's ever changing. There's always a theory. There's always something that might potentially work, and then you try it, and it might work, and it might not. I know that I've had people personally in my life that they thought, this is what it is, and they tried to give them this medicine and this treatment, and it didn't work, and so they had to pull them off of it, and they had to restart again. And so that's something that it's trial and error, but it's truly saving people's lives.
Absolutely.
So just that being said, like you said, this is done on research studies. Could you just give us, we have a couple minutes left, just
Sure.
a little bit of an understanding of what that means? Because you hear it, I hear it on the radio all the time, on TV, you know, be part of this, be part of a research study, be part of something medically that will help someone. What does that really mean, and does it truly benefit people if people hear that and maybe they do have symptoms of something and they're thinking about it, just to maybe educate them a little bit on what that actually means and going into a lab? And
I think you're referring to clinical trials.
Yes.
So in cases of clinical trials, we are trying to learn an answer to a medical question. So it means that if you're going to join a research study, it is signing up to be a part of the unknown or to help figure out the unknown in human health. So if someone decides they want to join a research study for migraines, they could be a completely normal individual that is used to help understand a non-migraine individual, or it could be someone that's affected by migraines, and we might want to look more closely at them to understand what could be causing it. Now that we have the tools and technology to really dive deeper into what each individual disease looks like, we want to do that for as many diseases as possible.
wonderful. So it's just being part of everything and knowing that we're all humans and we're all here and we're helping each other, and by helping yourself, you're helping someone else.
Absolutely.
So that is wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Brandy. It's been a pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
Wonderful things that you're doing here, and thank you so much at home for joining us here on Joy in Our Town. Like every week, if you have any questions or want to know more, the information has been displayed at the bottom of the screen, and there's actually some great resources on your website just if people are interested and to learn a little bit more about science or about precision and translational medicine. I hope that you have enjoyed this program, and we look forward to seeing you like every week next here on Joy in Our Town. Have a wonderful day.
This program has been sponsored by the Trinity Broadcasting Network and is made possible by your telethon dollars. Your continual support can keep Joy in Our Town coming to your home every week. Write to Joy in Our Town, Post Office Box A, Santa Ana, California, 92711.